So, are we rolling? Yes, we are. So, hello and welcome. I'm Roland. You might see that somewhere on my profile. Don't know which way to point, but anyway, I'm here with a little bit of a rant and a little bit of a story and a little bit of a shameless self plug. So, bear with me. So, I was having a conversation the other day, which prompted me to make this video. I'll explain in a sec. The conversation was with a very nice gentleman. He's someone I work with in the area of security consultancy, and despite my usual distaste for consultants, which I mention a lot on LinkedIn, he's someone I really enjoy working with. Within the conversation, we got to talking about risk management, which is something I also talk a lot about on LinkedIn here. In the same conversation, I had to mention my book, which contains, well, my book is not really about risk management per se, but it incorporates it in a strategic formula, kind of, where it's one of the major steps, as it should be in any security program, anywhere in any organization. I wrote the book based on things that I've tried and have worked for me in many organizations that I worked with. And I'm using the word organization because I want to highlight this is not just for corporations, for companies, for for-profit businesses, but rather for any kind of organization. The same approach works. And so in the conversation, I noticed how little effort I have put into marketing my book, which is a shame. I mean, it has done way better than I expected, to be honest. If it does a little better, I would be even happier. But the goal is not really a commercial success. The goal is more like respecting the subject matter that I have in the book, which I believe is really good and I believe is really on point, and which I really want to put out in the world for good discussions and hopefully good implementations also. So I'm making this video. I'm kind of highlighting the structure of the book, and I'm also gonna read a little passage from the book based on something some authors do sometimes. I've seen this with one of my favorite fiction authors. His name is John Green. He's not relying on me for a plug, obviously, but I'm just giving credit for the approach, where I think a few years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, he read the first chapter of his book. It's called Turtles All the Way Down, and he read the first chapter to his YouTube audience. Obviously, he's very famous on YouTube, which I'm not, but I have a little bit of a following on LinkedIn, so I thought it would be nice to make a video, maybe read a few of my favorite passages that are not included in free samples that you can find already. I have some on LinkedIn. So I decided to make this video just to give my own book its kind of rightful marketing effort, also familiarize you a little bit with the way I express myself with security, because it's really mundane, it's really down to earth. I just tell the story of security, quote unquote, how it should be done in a very simple day-to-day kind of language. Yes, I do use the terminology that the cybersecurity field offers whenever I feel the need. However, I don't necessarily like jargon and gatekeeping, and so I just kind of try to simplify the approach to security, make it a logical formula which you can parameterize and apply in your own organization. So I'm going to go through a couple of things in this video. Number one is why this book is important, why people should read it, especially, well, two kinds of people. People who work in the cybersecurity field, no matter the level of seniority or leadership they might have. I truly especially recommend it to CISOs or CISOs, depending where you are in the word. The pronunciation of the acronym can be different. I truly recommend it to people in that kind of position because I truly believe there's a gap in the knowledge of the formula to set up a cybersecurity program. A lot of CISOs excel at managing an existing program but don't know how to set up a new one and what the dependencies between the different steps are. Now you might ask, why am I qualified to tell CISOs what to do? Well, the answer is I've done all those things multiple times with different types of organizations, and so I have the proof from the real world to back up my claims. Hence why my book is called Real Life Cybersecurity, How Program Building Actually Works And the second type of person that would benefit from my book would be any kind of person with executive power, decision-making power. So that's your CTOs, that's your even CFOs who might have to manage really complicated budgets. They do not necessarily have to implement what I'm doing. There's someone else who should be implementing it. However, they would benefit from understanding the formula, how we arrive to the results we do under the system, how we decide how to budget for cybersecurity in a non-arbitrary way, or to be more realistic, in a less arbitrary way, which is instead of just guessing based on the direction of the wind and which day of the month it is, we would be making much more educated guesses using estimates that are reasonable and that our experience can back. So with that out of the way, why is the book important? Well, it's important because, as I highlight in the book, there are a few problems every single security professional and also decision maker in general in any organization faces when they're trying to help build or build themselves a cybersecurity program. What kind of problems? Well, I think the biggest one is not having solid foundations for the program, rooted in risk management in a way that makes sense for the organization, not just to satisfy some framework or standard. So instead of this just being an effort on paper, we can use that investment for real benefits on the ground, because even a status of compliance does not mean we're doing all that we can do to protect ourselves, our customers, to protect every stakeholder that has an interest in the security posture of our organization. Now that may sound a little bit idealistic, but it's really not. It's really in the benefit of the organization. It's a really selfish, survival-based thing to do. It's just that seeing the selfish interests in my book is a little bit more long-term and strategic, because I truly believe anything technical should be rooted in the strategic. It's not just a technical guess all the time, or what would look good on my CV as a security engineer or security leader. It's rather, what is the best strategic interest of this organization? Perhaps, if you want to be a little bit more idealistic, the industry at large, that being the security industry. So all that being said, I'd like to walk you through the structure of my book. Let me get the proof version that I had printed for the purposes of checking whether my design skills were on point before going to market. This version has this little not for resale ribbon here. I guess ribbon is the right word, though I could be wrong. So yeah, basically this is the book, the title I already mentioned, and my name in huge letters just because ego. So forgive me for that. So the book has generally 3 parts. I'll probably post a table of contents somewhere, either here or in the comments. However, part 1 is called The Golden Toolbox. Part 2 is called Glue Something Together, and part 3 is called Explore the Workshop. So I'm taking this kind of crafts analogy to convey a point, which is actually, it's all in the title of the first part, The Golden Toolbox. So what is the Golden Toolbox? Well, it's a set of tools, not in the rudimentary sense of like asset management tool or web application firewall or like technical tools of any kind, but rather tools in terms of things and concepts you should know in cybersecurity so that you can implement things strategically. For example, knowing how to do proper risk management is a tool in the toolbox. Knowing how to do proper asset management is a tool in the toolbox. Another example, knowing how to interpret controls from any standard or regulation or even self-imposed controls, knowing how to interpret them in reality and how they project to the actual assets, how they apply to them, that's a tool in the toolbox. Knowing which type of control to select for any type of situation or any type of risk, to be more accurate, is also a tool in the toolbox. And so on and so forth. I give kind of one-to-one analogies between actual woodworking tools or crafts tools and tools in this deeper meaning that I mean with cybersecurity programs. So the Golden Toolbox, it's the set of building blocks that I think is the most fundamental to build a cybersecurity program. And in this part, there's a chapter dedicated for each one, but there's a chapter that is dedicated to the full picture, how we go from zero to steady state cybersecurity program. So this is something I call chapter 0 in my book, and the title is The Journey of a Craftsman, Full Process at a Glance. In the chapter, there's a very nice diagram that I think illustrates the point I'm trying to make. And if it doesn't convey the point or drive the point fully home, at least it displays the different concepts I'm trying to communicate and also the interdependencies between them on one either screen or piece of paper, depending on whether you read the ebook or paperback or hardcover version. So the diagram is really like, hey, this is the final picture. This is the whole map, removing the fog of war from the situation, the story of the book, and just telling you this is what I'm trying to help you figure out how to do. And then we can start zooming in section by section and understanding how to do each component well. So instead of just infinitely teasing and explaining and explaining and explaining, I try to bring you along and say, hey, this is the premise, this is the goal. Are you with me? And that's what chapter 0 is about. So I'm reading some passages that are kind of independent, kind of can exist in a vacuum outside of the other words that are written in the book. With that being said, let's read the first passage I think would whet your appetite for the book. Here we go. I have a simple question. Why are we here? And no, I don't mean that in an existential sense, but rather a very mundane one. Why are we here in this book? I hope the answer is along the lines of, because our cybersecurity program just feels wrong. I completely understand the sentiment. So why do we struggle so much with program building? It just sounds like we need to do 3 things and then we're there, right? Well, I mentioned the systematic issues in the introduction, but here's a little bit of a refresher. 1. We don't know where to start. You can't build a birdhouse without identifying the type of wood you'd like to use, acquiring it, and managing it. In the same way, you can't build a cybersecurity program without asset identification. Start there. Number 2. We don't understand the dependencies. Our cybersecurity measures rarely stand alone and are rather a cog in the machine, serving a specific function. So let's understand together what cogs are interdependent and how a missing or broken part can affect other parts. Don't ignore that weird noise your car is making. Fix the process. Number 3. We don't sufficiently understand each step of the process. We are often asked to build complicated systems while we don't quite understand their parts. And then we're surprised when the whole is not equal to the sum of a bunch of misunderstood concepts. Let's fix that while learning the true value of each part. Number 4. We don't sufficiently understand the technology. We are often concentrated on security tools and topics in our continuous education efforts. If you have a gap in your understanding of a tool or technology, you will at best protect it in an inefficient and incompatible way, and at worst fail to protect it altogether. You have to possess knowledge in the general tech world as well as in cybersecurity. So that was the first passage. I think it sets the premise quite nicely. Lets you know what kind of problems you should expect and you should also look to solve within yourself as a security professional. I think this book again is for aspiring CISOs, but at any level that you work in an organization, you should strive to solve these 4 major problems that plague security work, I would say, to be really generic. I'm going to read you now a second passage from the same chapter that leads into the diagram I was talking about earlier. Here we go. Why are you reading this book? Why are you trying to build a cybersecurity program to begin with? What's our end game? The answer is quite simple. We want to design controls. Design controls. Vague, nebulous, non-deterministic, open-ended. I understand, I struggled with it too when I first started, but that's why this book is here, to disambiguate this whole process. Fear not, we'll get there in due time. First off, what is this term anyway? Controls, quote unquote. What do we mean there exactly? Yes, we're gonna start at this rudimentary level. We're gonna get the basics right. Controls are basically the measures that will answer requirements and protect assets. Let me give you an example. You have an S3 bucket and you're under GDPR regulations. Those would be your assets and your requirements definition. Feeling lost already? Don't worry, we will expand on each and every step of the process and explain different terminology later in the book. For now, take what I say at face value and try to meet me halfway. So, requirements defined, assets known, problem solved? Question mark? Not quite. We still have to interpret those requirements through some mysterious method and determine what we need to do, i.e. controls. Those controls would then have to apply to our assets. In our example, GDPR requires the use of, quote, appropriate technical and organizational measures, end quote, to protect your digital assets containing data. Well, let's think of a simple measure we can apply to our S3 bucket. I generally start with server-side encryption as the simplest initial measure to apply to S3 buckets and any other data-wielding asset for that matter. And that, right there, is an example of a control. Granted, not a very sophisticated one, but a good working example nonetheless. So, is there a method to this madness? If this is the end goal, is there a solid methodology to follow and systematically get there? You bet there is. What if I have a database rather than an S3 bucket? What changes? Allow me to throw a diagram at you to further illustrate the point and demonstrate the generalized concept. I'll try to show the diagram here on paper just because I just like the way it looks on paper. Of course, I don't expect you to be able to read the small print. However, I'm gonna also post the diagram either somewhere in the comments or flash it on screen. I haven't decided how good my editing skills are yet. So, leading into the diagram, right, with this little story, which is, again, not very sophisticated, just very common, which is the point. Those problems are common, and there is a systematic formula that can solve them, illustrated in the diagram. That's why I think this diagram, which represents the formula, is valuable and also helps show why the formula itself is valuable. So it's not that the diagram is the formula, it's a model of the formula, and no model is truly exactly the real thing. However, it shows the value of the formula, which itself is also valuable. So now to another passage which I think really helps to drive the point home. Here we go. First off, you might be thinking, well, wait just a damn minute. S3 bucket encryption, I'm already applying security controls. You're absolutely right. As previously mentioned, you're not a dummy. Just because you don't have the magic formula for the golden toolbox doesn't mean you've never used the hammer. Most likely, you're an expert with one or a handful of those tools in our golden toolbox. This book is not trying to teach you a specific tool, but rather how to put them all together and make them sing for you. Weird analogy? I guess so, but stay with me. So I guess we can agree that you know how to protect things. I hope we can also agree that you're already protecting some of your things. I'm here to teach you how to approach think protection systematically. How do we get there? Glad you asked. Let's start. Let's go back to our diagram above. I hope you'll notice that at the center there are assets, risks, and metrics. This is a very deliberate configuration of the diagram to show you that those things are of the essence for our program creation. I hope you'll also notice that there is a start here sign next to the assets node. Let's unpack that for a second. There is a very good reason to start with asset identification, and that is something we will go back to later in the chapter. For now, let's just explain what assets are, what they entail, and how we start with their identification. This is step 0 of program building. First, you need to know the assets you have on your plate so that you know what you're protecting and how to protect it. Controls, remember? Assets can really be anything, from servers to routers to firewalls and all the technical equipment you can think of, to even people, processes, code, or any other thing that is valuable to your business or organization. Server hardware is an asset. Windows licenses are an asset. Cloud load balancers are an asset. Salespeople are an asset. Senior developers are an asset. Security engineers are an asset. And even internal tools with very limited use qualify as an asset. You get the idea. So what does the diagram tell us about assets then? Well, assets are a node and a fundamental one. And that node has vertices, meaning there are some relationships between assets and other things we need to do to those assets. For example, we need to protect assets. That is one trivial but fundamental part of our diagram. As another example, assets are determined by business needs. What does that mean? It means that the context of your organization largely affects the decision to acquire certain assets and the emphasis you put on some assets or others. Consider this. If you're a banking institution, you probably have some need to acquire tamper-proof envelopes for important communications, as well as have a solid process around those communications. The envelopes are an asset, the processes are a control, and they're informed to an extent by your organization's nature and what type of business it's trying to conduct. Can you already feel yourself gaining a better understanding of dependencies? So that should give you a taste of my approach, how I'm walking you through basics that are not so basic, how I'm helping you excel at those basics so that you can excel at the more advanced things, and then put the whole thing together, because that's the nature of risk management, really, and security. We have to be strategic. We have to reduce risks systematically. Reducing a few risks or a subset of them to the minimum doesn't really help us. We're still susceptible to other risks that we haven't reduced. So reducing, for example, 20 risks to 20% of their initial exposure is better than reducing one risk to 0%, which is also in practice impossible. You need an infinite investment to get there, and since there is no infinite money printer, except if you're the government or central bank, then that's not very realistic, is it? So we can't reduce one risk to 0%, but let's say we can reduce it to infinitesimal amounts. I would say that's not super valuable when compared to reducing all the risks down to something reasonable like 10 to 15% of the initial risk value, whatever that value in your quantification system is. In my case, I like to do it with money, because the real world works with money, not with color boxes called low, medium, and high, or any kind of abstract measurement that complicated frameworks like to use. I'm more of a pragmatic person who thinks in the real world, money talks. So yeah, that's just a little taste, little teaser. If you're interested in the book, I'll have links all over the place. It's not really about commercial success for me, to be honest. I mean, if the book does do well, I would be super happy. It's not like I would complain, the book is doing too well, you must buy fewer copies. But rather, it has already done better than I expected, and so I'm super grateful to that. I'm not looking to make talking about cybersecurity my day job. That's not really my ambition here. However, I'm looking to really make an impact in the industry, help people who cannot find resources that explain the formula step by step like I do. And trust me, I researched a lot about this, both when I was starting to learn about cybersecurity, trying to make sense of this whole formula and ecosystem of interdependent things, and when I was writing my book, to make sure I'm not just reinventing the wheel somehow. But I couldn't really find something that explains all these concepts, simply ties them together, helps you understand what to do step by step. So I truly think this book is valuable, has the potential to make really good impact on our security industry, and I believe the industry needs it. I could be wrong, but I truly believe that. So there we go. I hope my rambling was valuable, and better yet, perhaps enjoyable. I hope conversations get started. I hope we can discuss. I hope we can have backs and forths about these concepts. I hope we can, first and foremost, make a real change to a chaotic industry that is, if I may say so myself, struggling a little bit to keep up with the challenges. And this is not a doom and gloom message, but rather a very hopeful one that echoes my sentiment in the book of we are doing things suboptimally, but that doesn't mean we're doomed. To the contrary, that means there is a better way and we all know about it. We just need to put it all together. And that means just start doing things right rather than chasing short-term gratification / quick wins, but rather just systematically invest, take the heat in the short term, and then have sustained value. Always invest in our security programs to make them viable, to make them useful, and to make them a long-term steady state machine. So thank you so much for listening. I appreciate your time. And yeah, until the next one.